Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to have you all here on this fourth Odyssey Europe community call already. It's the last one of this year. So we have a nice topic lined up for you today about vocabularies. So we're going to run through what is there. Let's start with the publications that came out from the Odyssey Europe community in the last month. The first article that came out in November was published in Scientific Reports, the evaluation of hybrid stroke quality indicators by integrating NIHSS and claims data for improved outcome prediction, where they linked claims data to patient-level clinical data from over 15 hospitals using the OMOP CDM. So it's nice to see that work being presented here. The second publication was work done with the CPRD database by Berta Koyas and all trends in incidence, prevalence, and survival of primary liver cancer in the UK. And then the third one in Jamia by the team of Pablo Guerrero, the AIR-MS data platform for artificial intelligence in healthcare, where they have integrated structured and unstructured data from multiple sources also into the OMOP CDM. Very interesting piece of work there. Then an article published by Melissa Finster in BMC Medical Informatics Decision Making on common data models and data standards for tabular health data, a systematic review with the idea of determining the best approaches to harmonize patient data. And they looked at several different data models, so it gives a nice overview. Then last but not least, the publication that we will also be highlighting today. So I'm not going to speak about that. I know it's been talked about before. This was a publication already in September, but we thought it was very interesting. So we invited the authors onto the call, and I think we have both Florian and Agota on the call. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And give the word to Florian so he can tell us a little bit more about this publication.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the invitation. So this is the work that came out from me and Agota mainly. It's about mapping our national drug terminology in Austria to RxNorm and extension. I'm not sure if Agota is already here, but she will continue with a few slides then. And she made the slide deck as well. Yeah, so we tried to come up with an approach to our problem that we don't have really a neat mapping ready to be used for our national drug terminology. And we came up with this approach where we use several publicly available supplementary information or vocabularies to come up with a initial approach or initial mapping for the drugs in Austria. So next slide. Until now, we have ATC-based mapping, but of course, as you might know, this is only on the ingredients level. So it's a good start, and it's used by all the OMOP projects so far in Austria. Our national drug terminology has about 20,000 concepts in there, and we are also tried to do the mapping with the drug mapping tool, but we didn't get really good results. Part of that is, of course, all the drug concepts in our national vocabulary are in German language. So yeah, we did a semi-automatic approach using auxiliary data, ISP-Liste. This is the name of our national drug vocabulary, and we then incorporate in our mapping process a lot of auxiliary data sources, and then using the structure of RxNorm and extension, do iteratively refinements on the mapping. And the methodology is as follows. We started with ingredients mapping by using the already available ATC codes. Also did some name matching, also with language translations via a German vocabulary that's out there. We used the substance management system names from EMA. and also CS numbers for the substance itself, and partly also use brand names for instances where the brand name is specific to a certain ingredient. After that, the more complicated dose form mapping was performed mainly by the email product information sheets, and also we did some probabilistic matching based on based on the ingredients mapping before. The brand mapping was rather straightforward. We used the common prefix search of the drug name in our source vocabulary, and then the refinement, as I said before, was done by traversing through the RxNorm and extension hierarchy by incorporating, for example, the strength information or the size and box sizes. Yeah, so the results were that about 95% of all the concepts could be mapped, and for 30 or 73% of them we could come up with a more specific than just the ingredients based or level mapping. We faced most challenges with herbal medicines and blood substitutes, and we also did a little validation via a vocabulary from Hungary, and we matched our mappings and their mappings based on the subset of EU marketed drugs, because we have an identifier for the EU drugs in there. And we made our mapping and also the software to do it publicly available via GitLab, and we export our mappings in Usagi CSV format and also concept maps via concept maps. And we are now continuously updating this mapping or performing the steps again. And this has been done last month. And yeah, right now we have about, as I already said, 20,000 concepts. And I'm not sure if Agota is in the call, but she will continue.
Yes, I am here, Florian. Yeah. So while working with Florian and with another project, I realized that, okay, this is really cool, but how can others use it? Like this mapping needs a really structured drug database where someone has their national drug code, the ingredient, the strength, and like, yeah, maybe you would love to use it, but how can you find this publicly available data if you do not have it already in your country? Because if someone already has such a good quality data where they have the dose form, the ingredient, the strength, the brand name, then probably someone already did this mapping. But if someone could not do it, then the next slide, there is an EURIPID database, which is not publicly available, but they are really happy to share and contribute to OMOP with their database. It's a database for mutual sharing of prices of medicines from 31 countries, but for the reason they want to share the prices between each other, but for this reason, they create a structured database of the dose form, the ingredient, the strength, the brand name, and so on by hand, based on the official list of the national drug and reimbursement authorities in each of these 31 countries. So it means that these countries send them in Lithuanian, in Croatian, in Spanish language, their drug names, and they take it out and translate it to an English standardized database. Next slide. And this is the database structure. It has a product code. This is the national product code. These are the Hungarian drugs, but it's for all the 31 countries. There is a brand, the product name, latest version, but that is, of course, in the national language here in Hungarian. And the package latest version is not a standardized column, but there is a standardized column dosage form, the ATC code, the ingredient and the strength and the number of units. And this is done by one person and then checked by another person, and at least one of them is a pharmacist, so they have a pharmacist degree to check. So they want to create a really high quality database. And of course it has other columns with the prices, which are shared between the national reimbursement authorities, and that is not something what we would use for the mapping, but this part can be used. Next slide. So, of course, in this way, someone would not need all the publicly available and databases and combine them, but this U-repeat structured data can be used. Maybe I am not sure that Florian's method right now is good for that. So maybe there is some changes needed, or someone can just use the drug mapping tool or some other tools. So this is not just clearly connected to Florian's paper, but in general, if someone is open to this, then please, next slide, then please contact me or the EU-repeat leader in Hungary, Németh Gergely, and then please reach out, and I hope we can find a solution and share with you your country's standard data, and then you can have a better quality drug mapping, or you can just check your own drug mapping. Maybe you will find some inconsistencies and so on. Yes, I saw the chat that there is we can access. I tried to contact EMA, and I know that they also have some database. This is just one more opportunity if someone has.
Yeah, we have that. We have that. So we have to contact with EMA for that. So I have that database.
This database or the EMA database?
EMA database.
Okay, that's also very great. I think the more we have, then the more opportunities we have. I just wanted to share this opportunity with the European data partners. Thank you.
Oh yeah, Peter, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So of course, and I think Anna's probably also online. There's of course also the procedure or the tooling that Odyssey has created to use the boiler to map these data. Have you considered that? And if you have considered that, would it be interesting to just compare what that would do and what your tool will do? There are many different solutions that try to get these drugs mapped now. It would be good to have a bit more comparison of those methods. But I think, Anna, are you online as well? Could you reflect on that as well?
Yeah, I will touch on it. I think it's very good to do this comparison, because I'm sure there is a lot to learn from this tooling as well, especially given the coverage. So I think it would be a nice collaborative project that we can take on in 2026, and I'm very excited to work together.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, but maybe there are some reasons why you didn't use the boiler. We can talk about that right away.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not aware of this tool.
Okay.
We keep assuming people know because we work on it. Well, everybody must know about it. But definitely, I think we will use this opportunity later today to actually introduce more people to what we use in the vocabulary team.
Yeah.
But again, that being said, I think it's a meaningful collaboration opportunity to actually compare and learn from each other.
Yeah, definitely. I would even say scale this up to all kind of other tools, because if you remember from the Odyssey Europe Symposium, there were like multiple teams building similar tools, which is great because it shows that there's a big need from everybody. But probably if we just compare the tools and work together on it, it would be a very nice opportunity for next year, which is one of the reasons why this is on the agenda for the Odyssey Europe call today, I think. But that's, I think, a big opportunity, and it's nice to see so much effort ongoing. But it's even better if we would do it together and we would build something together that works everywhere, because it's maybe not that complicated task. It's just a task that needs to happen. We just need to break down the drugs into the components and just map them, get it over with, and in 2027 talk about another domain. That will be my dream. Just get them all over, get them all in, and then move on, because there are more complicated domains actually beyond drugs as well that we should tackle.
Definitely.
But thank you. Very nice to see this overview.
I would also have a question to you, actually. I'm not aware of a good solution or system in place where we can share agreed upon like mappings, especially with the EU marketed drugs. This would be an opportunity to have the mapping done once and use it in all the member states, right?
Yeah. Well, the ideal situation where we try to move towards is that this is in the Odyssey vocabularies, right? But this is the scalability issue that we just run into. But ideal situation is that it's in a TINA, that everybody can download it from a TINA. We're not there yet, and this is something we need to figure out. In the meantime, I know there are a couple of nodes, and maybe Miguel Angel, you're also thinking about that. They are going to set up their own GitHub with their mappings. But for me, it's an intermediate solution. It's not the final solution. We need to have something Odyssey-wide that solves this problem. And that is eventually, I think, Athena, that should be there. There are some restrictions sometimes with licenses that, for example, our Z-index license, it's not agreed upon, and we can try it again to have these codes made available to everybody, but only to those people that have licenses. There's also a mechanism in the vocabularies. There's multiple other examples that have that, but this may need a bit more investigation how to do that for each of the individual countries. But the ultimate situation, ideal situation for me would be you go to Athena, you download your country's mapping, your source vocabulary mapping to the standard. But I also realized that the size of Europe and looking at all these maps or all these flags here is just of a different scale. And this is also why OMOP and the standardized vocabularies are so important in Europe, because we have all these different things, which is maybe different in the US. At least less countries. So the biggest need for OMOP and vocabularies is in Europe, I dare to say, because of all this complexity. But it doesn't mean we have to invest together to make it better. And this requires resources, it requires people, effort, infrastructure maybe as well that we need to set up to solve this problem. I think it's solvable with the right funding and streams behind it and training of people. But that would be the ultimate thing. In the intermediate time, we need to think about solutions, because I realize that we are moving fast. And if you talk also about Darwin, we are running studies over these countries. We need to do it now. We do not have time to wait for another year. We have been waiting a little bit too long already. We need to move forward with this, and that may require an intermediate solution. But it's not the ideal end solution for me, just to be very transparent on that. But we need to make steps now. It needs to happen. A lot of other large projects are coming on. The radar as well in Europe, where we all have the same problem, and the European health data space should be helped with what we do, and have the data standardization just fixed. Definitely for the drugs. There's one thing, caveat maybe a little bit, that there is, of course, ongoing initiatives in Europe itself to get rid of all these standards, all these vocabularies in the countries. So the IDMP standard, which has been talked about for a long time, and I had some interactions with some people about it. It's getting closer to be accepted. Once that's there, of course, then we all have the same vocabulary, ideally, but it will still require quite some time. And knowing that they've been working on it for, I don't know, maybe 10 years already, I don't know, but a long time. I first need to see it before I believe it, and I cannot use it next year for sure. So there needs to be a solution, an intermediate solution, but eventually maybe it's there. And then the IDMP, which is actually international, it's not only European, it's also used across the world, would be a solution. But now we have to deal with RxNorm extension as a solution for multiple years there still, I think. But Anna, maybe you have some thoughts about that as well.
I think this is a spot on description. Whoever has drug vocabularies and want to add them, we really encourage you to either talk to Renske, because she's been doing amazing work on collecting the information about the drug vocabularies across the European countries, or talk to us, because we keep the list of the things in need, and we do work steadily on incorporating those. Spanish drugs is an example, and Dima here in the call, as well as Oleg, are working together to help them get their drug data into Odyssey vocabularies. So if you have a need, talk to us, and that would be the first step.
I mean, we could start with the subset of drugs of the national vocabularies that are EU marketed, right? Because they should be the same in all the member states. So maybe that's one step forward.
Yeah, I've looked a little bit into that. I'm not sure. Maybe Marcel's also online. We've looked earlier in a version of the Article 57 database, and of course that's very large. And they have now have access to a new version, which is broken down in ingredients and forms, etc. It's very large, and you may need to prioritize some because it's covering everything that's on the market, they say. But we've also found, at least in the previous version, that there were drugs in the Netherlands that were not in the Article 57 database for some reason, which should not happen because all the pharma companies have an obligation to inform EMA about this new drug and these new milligrams on the market. So there may be reasons why it's not in there, and maybe it is now in the new version. But we need to also be a little bit pragmatic, because if you map all the drugs on the European market, this is a big thing. And some of them may actually be not used or very little used, or may have less priority. So it's also good to think a bit about how pragmatically we can be to make progress for those drugs that we are going to use in most of the studies. So it's something that we have explored also in the IPSI database, where we ordered at some point the drugs by frequency, but now I think we have a very large coverage of the Z index to RxNorm or an RxNorm extension. Yeah, Maxime.
I do have a different comment on what I saw in the granularity of the mapping. Bit of a warning on using drug box. I think 50% of your drug mappings were the clinical drug box or a branded box. Make sure the quantity in the drug exposure table, the quantity should refer to the individual tablets and not to the number of boxes. Just a general awareness warning.
Yeah, this needs training indeed, because we're working with so many databases, we've seen different approaches to using the box levels, and even though I think there's documentation about it, it's quite easy to think one means one box, but that's not how it should be interpreted. And Anna, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the case.
Yeah, in our case, this information, to have it in the vocabulary is really useful, because our dispensations are based on the boxes from the national e-health system. So that's why we concentrated on that as well. But thanks for the remark.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for presenting this work, and I think we really need to keep this dialogue going to see all the initiatives that are ongoing in the drug and the mapping space. Yes, in light of time, I'm quickly going to move forward because we have two other great presentations. There is some news from the national nodes that I would like to share with you. And the first one is one that I'm a little bit jealous of myself, but I'm not going to apply. That is the postdoc position at the Medical University in Vienna that they have up for, I think, 9 months, that you can join their team to work on data collected in the H2O project. In the OMOP space. So if you're interested in perhaps going to the lovely city of Vienna with a great team there, then you can ask Georg, who's also on the call, or send him an email and see if you can apply for that position. Then some more news from Israel, who is very proud that the Rambam Healthcare Campus, which is the largest hospital in the northern Israel, has recently completed transforming its data to the OMOP CDM. So they now have more than 1.5 million patients and over 15 years of history in OMOP. So that's very exciting news. I think the other nodes were quite quiet this month, probably a lot going on. They are very busy writing their annual reports, which we will be presenting in the beginning of next year. So you'll get an overview of what has happened in the past year. And then we can move on to our next speaker from Odyssey, Belgium, which is Freija, who's going to tell us something about the work of the Belgian vocabulary team. So that should tie in very nicely with the topic of this call. Freija, very nice to see you.
Hi, everyone. I will share my screen. Okay. Very nice to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to present to you the Odyssey Belgium Vocabulary Working Group. We started becoming more active this year. Our first meeting was in April this year, and we have monthly meetings where we basically discuss a very familiar topic, I'm sure, which is there are common vocabularies being used in Belgium in the healthcare system, and these common vocabularies
are being mapped individually by different people, and that's a lot of double work. And so, of course, that's not the approach. We should try to map this from the Belgian perspective, so that we can use these mappings that are agreed upon in the Belgian health system. So that's the goal. We want to identify Belgian-specific vocabularies and then work towards including them in the Odyssey vocabularies and Athena. So our first meetings, my first discussions was a lot about, okay, what's the pain points? Where is this double work? So I would see Hospital A doing specific mappings and Hospital B would do the same mappings, and I would tell them to talk to each other. So that's really the focus, is to smoothen that workflow. The current focus, and what I'm going to talk about today, is this very particular Belgian vocabulary called RISIF, but we're also looking into the GTR vocabularies, which are drug specific. So we're meeting every month on the second Tuesday. Everybody's welcome, of course, to discuss challenges in mapping. I thought it would be interesting to present to you what we're currently working on, which is, like I said, RISIF or INAMI. And so RISIF is the Dutch way of saying it. INAMI is the French way of saying it. It is a reimbursement vocabulary, which of course is not ideal, but the reality is that a lot of OMOP instances are using these codes as a source data. It's a unique way to identify specific handlings that happen in the healthcare system, specifically to specify what gets reimbursed under the Belgian compulsory healthcare system, and then also specifies the amount, so how much will be reimbursed to the doctor, how much does the patient need to co-pay. And so we have about 11,000, 16,000 codes, depending on how you count it, and they're available in Dutch and French. The codes we have two types of codes. One is specifically healthcare provider identification. So is this a urologist or a cardiologist or a general practitioner? So that's where you would find those definitions. And then we have medical procedures and treatments. I have the frequency tables of Belgium from 2023, so about a billion codes were used. So that's over those 11,000 something distinct codes. I did have a small cell cut off on that export. So there's a tree structure. This is kind of nice, I guess. So we have chapters and articles, and I know this is in Dutch and French in some of these slides, but you can see, for example, within the vocabulary team, we've been trying to identify, okay, which chapters are low-hanging fruits or which ones are most important. So Article 14 is the surgery and where you would find your knee arthroplasty, for example, which appeared 44,000 times in 2023 in Belgium. Radiology, for example, the mammography appeared about 1 million times in 2023. And then scintigraphy of an organ, for example, appears about 13,000 times. So I have, like I said, I have the full frequency table. Don't worry, I don't expect people to know these codes by heart. But the most used code, I thought it was interesting, used more than 41 million times in Belgium in the year 2023, of course, was a visit to the primary care physician. So the vocabulary has three types of codes. We have stuff that is absolutely not medically relevant, I believe. For example, travel expenses of nurses and midwives. This is very much expected, I think, in this type of reimbursement vocabularies. Then we have what I'm calling, it's medically relevant, but we're missing the value. The government doesn't necessarily care what the outcome of a specific blood measurement was, right? They're not going to reimburse more if your cholesterol is low or something, right? Thank God for that. But so we know that this happened, but we don't know the value. So like counting erythrocytes. it's, we know that the procedure or the measurement happened, but we don't know the value. And then what I would think of the more medically relevant content of this vocabulary is where the procedures are and the radiology codes. So the radio, I already gave that example of, for example, radiography of the dorsal spine. There's a lot of clutter in it. So, how many images did they take? Because of course it's about money. So we need to know like how many images were taken at that stage, how many leads were used, etc. So again, a lot of these descriptions have a lot of clutter in them that don't necessarily need to be translated into the medical mapping. So I did a quick analysis, to kind of, what are we up against here, right? And so if you look at the coverage that we could, so this is coverage by using the 2023 frequency table. And so the way to read this is, for example, if you want to hit 99% coverage on the medically relevant, this is both with and without value. We as a team would have to map about 1,600 codes. So there's a lot of very rare codes in this vocabulary, of course. So how do we prioritize? Most of all of the OMOP instances are either hospitals or registries or kind of like private business data in Belgium. So from a group's perspective, the priority is on the hospital codes. So we have 7,286 codes that are used in hospitals, because I also have the frequency tables for all the codes and where they were used, in which context. So we're going through these chapters and starting to identify, okay, where are what's the low-hanging fruit here, basically. And a big elephant in the room is the English translation. So I heard somebody speaking about I think machine translation, right? So that's what I'm looking at currently. So we do have French and Dutch, so there's some possibility of cross-checking these translations, I guess. But as far as I understand, there's no English translation of any of these codes available. So the knee arthroplasty, there's also some good news. There's a lot of duplicates. So sorry, this is just a wall of text. But if you look at the first two codes, the 253 and 264, they're actually the exact same code. So there's changes. For example, when the reimbursement rules change, additional codes might be made, but the actual medical underlying interpretation is the same. So this is what I call the low hanging fruit, because arthroplasty of a knee, total knee replacement, this is an easy match that we could easily locate through some matching algorithms or things like that. So what are the next steps? So I myself am kind of figuring out, and by the way, shout out to Alexander as well, who's been helping me understand, okay, how do we actually integrate vocabularies into Odyssey and Athena? And so there's some scripts that I'm working on to ingest the quotes, etc. And then we as a team are going to be using an online application that will allow us to collaborate on these mappings. So there's been some hospitals and some individuals that have been kind enough to share their existing RISIF mappings. So I have a starting point already. So we're going to start with those mappings, select some of the easy stuff, and then we're going to start small, set up a few reviews, and then update the workflow as needed. I think a pragmatic approach here. So there's a mini demo time included here, so I just want to highlight the application that we're going to be using. I don't have RISIF codes yet in here, but for example, anybody these are volunteers, by the way, and I've not been able to get any funding for the vocabulary working group in Belgium. So I'm recruiting volunteers that would be willing to get a login to this type of application where we can have a very simple way of basically the code, what's the suggested mapping, and then they can, for example, say, okay, I agree with this or not. So it's a very simple interface for us as a team to be able to all work on the same mappings, right? So that we have one single location where everybody can comment and discuss. So it's a collaborative mapping platform, because then I can have a view of all the mappings. So currently in this demo instance, we have 135 mappings, and I can then go in and look, okay, where are the problems? For example, we can check. So now I'm checking, okay, which of the source codes have been mapped to this standard code? And I see there's multiple of them. It's an echocardiography. And then here I can see, okay, there's one of them is flagged, and this doctor had a specific question that maybe we need to discuss in the team. So that's the mini demo. Okay, so we're setting ourselves the goal by the end of March next year is to have 500 codes mapped. And so the mapped, we still need to discuss, what does this mean? How many reviewers need to review the same code? Like, how do we actually do releases of mapping? So this is all still to be discussed in the team. So I'm recruiting volunteer reviewers. This is why you saw my movie posters and everything. I'm working on some visuals to see if I can put together the RISIF mapping team in Belgium and get started. And that's all I had. But I'm happy to discuss or give additional details as needed.
Thanks very much, Freija. And I think what you described here is something I know that we're running into in the Netherlands as well. You know, everybody's trying their best to map their local data to OMOP, and we are repeating things that have already been done. So it'd be nice if we can share it somehow. And this tool seems like a nice place to do it. Any questions from the people on the call? Well, we will reach out to you. I hope there's people from Belgium that have become enthusiastic about joining your team, your mapping team here.
Thanks.
We are lucky that we have all these things that at least they have a SNOMED mapping behind them, most of them in the Netherlands. So somebody in our country thought this through, which I'm very happy about. Peter.
Freija, thanks for sharing that, and again showing activities in one of the countries on this. Very nice. One question I had about this funding issue. So you now have to map 500 codes. It's an enormous amount of work, but on the other hand, it's also not 10,000 codes. So it's a kind of scalable thing if you have more people working on it. But the other thing is, of course, getting funding for it. Is there? My experience is always with these type of funding that you need to embed it in some sort of other project and then make sure that you reserve some funding for this specific element, because it's hard to fund vocabularies as such. I think, although we're looking into some of these options at the moment on European level. But have you any thoughts in Belgium? So how would you be able to sustain this work? Because it's also not a one-off, I like to remind you, and you know, it's not a one-off exercise, right? Because these vocabularies are changing over time, and there needs to be updates. The target vocabularies are changing, so it's a really active role, which ideally, of course, should be all in the global Odyssey vocabulary team, all be managed. But on the other hand, it's nice to also have other people in the world that can contribute to their own vocabularies of their own country. So we're still looking for best ways to do that, I think. But funding is always an issue. And do you have any thoughts on in Belgium if there are any mechanisms for you to get funding for that piece of work that you're doing?
Yes, there is. So I myself, I'm also RISIF is an entity in Belgium, and I've already pitched 2 times now against them. It's like, this is your vocabulary, you know, you should probably be in charge of this thing. And I have already submitted proposals towards them as well, where it's like, hey, you know, this would cost this much money, and don't worry, we'll figure it out. So that's one avenue I've been pursuing, because I also think the standardization should be included in the RISIF data model as well. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and it's not Odyssey specific in that case then, right? And then there's some Belgian specific funding calls that happened that I also submitted some proposals towards, but yeah, not been successful yet. But I agree. So in my proposal that I submitted towards RISIF, I had a system in place where I would pay doctors per code. And I don't know if anybody on the call has experience with any of these type of structures, but I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to try that out as a workflow where there's some payment per code or per mapping that we could have. So in one of the proposals, that's how I had designed it.
Yeah. Well, it's all about the quality control, right? So how do you actually train even if you pay them, doesn't guarantee that the quality is good enough. So you still need to build in some quality control steps in that as well. And those people also need funding. And so it's really a big task. This is also why, of course, also for the Odyssey vocabulary team, this is a struggle. How do we get the resources? We all agree that all needs to be done, but you need to have more people. And I'm very big in favor of a distributed approach where multiple teams can contribute under the same quality control criteria, and that I think there needs to be some steps taken there still to train people on that. But yeah, I really like these national initiatives just to move things and initiate then more standard collaboration across Europe and with the whole world. I think is very nice. But we need it big time. So this is, and you also touch upon non-drug things, which is a bit more complicated, I would say, because that requires a lot of more clinical expertise. The drug coding systems are, in that sense, more structured, and of course you need to know about drugs, but it's a different type of expertise that you may need than for the clinical mappings, especially with those very detailed local coding systems in the own language and these kind of things. That will require some more expertise. You also mentioned this translation issue. I think we are moving a little bit to a stage where translation is not the biggest problem anymore, because with the LLMs, and we've been doing some experiments ourselves also with mapping tools with LLMs, it's getting much better to do it through that system, but it still requires quality control checks. So you still need to have this person with this local knowledge to go through at least the ones that the LLM is most uncertain about. So I think in the future, most effort will be done in making these algorithms better in identifying where they are not certain about. And that means that you then can prioritize those with your human expertise. But there may be other situations where it's very clear that it's right. And why do you then have to review that? So you need to find a mechanism to prioritize human in the loop review of these tools. And that's going to make a big difference, I think, especially for scaling up in the first round and then maybe later focus on lower level of quality issues or so.
I fully agree. Sorry, on the translation, translation is a requirement for me to be able to add the vocabulary to the Odyssey at Lina. So that's one thing. But then we do have algorithms that don't require translation. We have LLMs, of course, on the platform. And then one trick, if anybody, SNOMED comes in all kinds of languages, right? So it's much more efficient to use as a target the Dutch SNOMED, or do both, right? And you just see what comes out of. So that's another trick that we do. So we use the SNOMED French and Dutch SNOMED versions.
I know in the Netherlands we have an organization that mapped ICPC 1 to SNOMED, so that's done by NICTIS. They own that problem. But then we still saw, looking at that there were some codes mapped in a way that I would have done differently with the idea of OMOP in mind, because it's done mainly for the doctors to pick things, but we sometimes need a bit more granularity, and they then didn't do that. So it still requires quality control, even if you take it from these other organizations that claim to own the problem. And I think they did a good job, but there were some instances that required some additional changes.
Yeah, and sorry, one last thing. The quality control is something that I think as we start, we in Belgium need to decide, okay, when are we going to release a mapping and what does that mean? How many eyes do we have on it? And how can I think quality control, we can do a lot with AI. Like we can also put an agentic AI on it and be like, hey, try to figure out what the weird stuff in these mappings. So I think we can also include some of these.
I think the ideal situation, of course, is, and that's I think what Anna also was
referring to. My dear friends, we need to move.
Yeah, we need to
have one more presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks very much for this, Freija, and I think this is something we should definitely discuss at a national node level as well, to see how we can do this within our countries and do the overlap there. Now I'm gonna move on. I'm going to skip this slide, Anna. You don't need an introduction. Thank you so much for getting up early and joining us on this call. Anna's going to tell us a little bit more about how to get your vocab into the standard vocabs.
Okay, sorry to be the buzzkill, but there is quite a bit of content. So let's see how we can get through this fast enough. this presentation was meant to also include Marcel and Tom, who are graciously on this call and have gone through this experience, and we'll see if we have time for their reflections too. So to get right in, the RxNorm extension that we started as a project back in 2017, Dima can attest to the correctness of this date, pretty much built on the NLM standard, on RxNorm, and as a reference to also the comments in the chat about SNOMED, back in the days, SNOMED didn't have a good model for drugs. Now they're keeping up with that, and they introduce more and more drugs, and we're exploring in collaboration with them what we can learn from their experience. But as of now, RxNorm extension as a model to represent international drugs outside of the US is built on top of RxNorm and follows its structure. And what you see in front of you on the screen is how the drugs are represented in RxNorm. So you have the ingredient, you have the, for example, valproate, you have the drug strength, the dose form, the brand name, and their permutations create different drug classes. For example, if it's just ingredient, it would be an ingredient class. If it's ingredient plus drug strength, it would be a clinical drug component. If you add dose form on top of that, that would be clinical drug, and so on and so forth. And this structure allows you for two things. First, it actually creates the basis for a very nice hierarchy that if you've done any code set creation for drugs, you would know that RxNorm hierarchy is quite nice. And second is that because there are these attributes, it provides us with an opportunity to map the drug vocabularies, not string by string, where you need to, somehow lexically map the drug, but instead to split the drugs into these attributes, only map the attributes, and then have the machine do the rest. And as a last note here on the slide, we use all of these attributes in the RxNorm extension, similar to how RxNorm does it, and we introduced also a couple of other attributes which did not exist at the time, box size and supplier. And that resulted in new drug classes such as marketed product for those products that have the suppliers. But in general, it very much closely follows the structure of the RxNorm. And if we look at the overall process, how one would incorporate their drug vocabulary into the Odyssey vocabularies, it all, of course, starts with downloading the source drug vocabulary. Usually you do have a reference, as nicely shown in the previous presentation, and it might require translation. Here it assumes that you are operating at some point with already translated content that is in English. You then go on to split the drugs into attributes. So for each drug, you need to identify the ingredient, the name, just the name of it, the dose form, drug strength, brand name, and supplier. Then you take these attributes and map those attributes to RxNorm or RxNorm extension. And there are two additional details here. I mean, mapping of attributes is rather straightforward. You have valproate ingredient, you map it to RxNorm ingredient. There is an option to have precedence when there are more than one available match in the target vocabularies. And there's also an opportunity to convert units, because sometimes in the source vocabularies, you do have a variety of units that are not standard units in the drug vocabulary. After that, there is a quality assurance part, and a quality assurance is actually a multi-step process. Just for the sake of this slide, it's only shown once. But in the quality assurance, you want to look at different aspects of the drugs. Right now, what we have in place is pass-fail tests, as well as those where you need to look at the results and examine them. And examples of tests would be, maybe there are unmapped attributes for which there is a direct similar name in the RxNorm or RxNorm extension. Or maybe you have a tablet that for some reason has liquid formulation, which should not exist. Or maybe you have a drug with two ingredients in a liquid form, but their volumes do not match. So really throughout the years, as we accumulated more drug vocabularies, we kept expanding this quality assurance part, and I think much more still can be done. But quality assurance is kind of an integral part in this process. And then the last step is that you run the machinery, which is conventionally called boiler, but the official name of it is build RxNorm extension. And what it does is that based on the attributes that you inputted for a given drug, it finds the best combination of attributes based on the precedence. And we also allow for either 5 or 10 window for dosages. I think it's still 10, to allow for slightly different formulations across the markets. And if the exact combination exists, it would create a maps to link. If it doesn't exist, it creates a new term in our RxNorm extension, places it in the hierarchy, and fills the gaps. The machinery that exists on the vocabulary version 5.0 on the GitHub also has the drop mapping mode only, which will take all of the same inputs, but will run the script up to this point where everything is mapped. And it allows also for mapping to less granular terms if no exact match exists. So there are two modes. One is the full mode, where the new terms are created if no matching exists, and there is drug mapping mode, where it's matched to the best match. And I have the link down here to the documentation that describes how one would go about it in more details. With the most recent example of something that's been refreshed is the UK vocabulary DM+D. So there is a folder for DM+D on the GitHub, and it follows this process precisely. Now to really explain how it looked like at the end, we can, for example, take this term from a French vocabulary that we have in BDPM, and the source term says Valp DE sodium Zentiva 200 milligram per milliliter, sol buvable. Now, if you split it into attributes, which the source does provide, you would see that the ingredient is sodium valproate, the drug strength is 200 milligram per milliliter, the dose form is oral solution, the supplier is Zentiva. Of course, some of it requires translation, but at least they were good enough to provide in their source vocabulary the standalone ingredients, and I think even the standalone brand names, so that we don't have to do the guessing. But this is the source term. After the whole pipeline is run, you would, even before going to that, so what does RxNorm have for valproate? Is there a good match already? If you look at RxNorm, at the top, you'll see that there is an ingredient and there is valproate oral solution. So we're getting closer, it's warmer. And there is something, but with a different drug strength, valproate 50 milligrams per milliliter oral solution. So this doesn't quite work for us because it's a different strength, but it doesn't have supplier. So we can run machinery in the pipeline that I just described. And because no match exists in the current corpus, it will create a new term, valproate 200 milligram per milliliter oral solution by Sanofi. I put it as the Easter egg. We don't have time to discuss why it's Sanofi, but and not Zentiva, but here it's Sanofi. And of course, you can see on the slide very clearly that there is a logical gap. We have now this standalone RxNorm extension term, and it's not connected to the RxNorm. So the very last step that the machinery does is that it fills the gaps in the hierarchy in between the available standard term and the newly created term. So in this case, it creates two new terms that represent clinical drug and quantified clinical drug. So at the end, you have the source term with the maps to, you have the term in the RxNorm extension, and you have the full hierarchy, and that sits in Athena. With that being said, what it looks like as of 2025, we have 12 vocabularies from 10 countries. You can see the countries on the screen. And what it represents is 2,000 new ingredients, 17 clinical drugs, 173,000 branded drugs, and many more quantified drugs and marketed products. But that sort of gives you the sense of how many new things that are not in RxNorm exist across these 12 vocabularies. And one of the things that I don't think I have on these slides, but I wanted to make a note of, there are 2,000 new ingredients. But in fact, if you look at the distribution of the drugs across these markets on the screen, you will notice that 90% of the drugs actually rely on the ingredients from RxNorm. So even though 2,000 ingredients is a big number, in fact, most of the drugs do rely on the ingredients that are commonly known. And that sort of gives you a sense of how many things are there from the 12 vocabularies. And I wanted to move on into talking a little bit about the input tables, or how they look like. These are the tables that one fills if they want to follow this process. And then after that's filled, the manual work or semi-manual work is done, and the rest is taken care of by the machinery. So we'll briefly go through them. The drug concept stage is the table that contains all of the drugs and the attributes. So for example, you have here one drug and one device, and also in gray are the attributes that you also add to the drug concept stage that are used across those drugs. The example of quality assurance here is that the vocabulary is in the vocabulary table. The internal relationship stage is where you keep the links in between drugs and their attributes. For example, you can see here the same drug we saw in the drug concept stage with the links to 2 ingredients that are used in this drug, as well as the drug form and the brand name. An example of quality assurance that we have is that one drug cannot have more than 2 dose forms, more than 1 dose form, or more than 1 brand name. The drug strength is where you keep the information about the dosages. It's very similar to the drug strength. And there are different rules on how you would fill it, depending on whether it's a liquid drug or a tablet drug or solid drug, such as tablet. In the interest of time, I will not go into more details. But example of quality assurance here that we have is that a liquid drug, if it's a liquid drug and it has more than 1 ingredient, the volume should match because the volume is fixed for the drug. And then finally, relationship to concept is what links the source vocabulary to the RxNorm and RxNorm extension. And this is where you would fill the source attributes as well as to their mappings to RxNorm. For example, in the first line, ethinyl estradiol in IMPS maps to RxNorm ethinyl estradiol. And the example of quality assurance here is that if you haven't mapped something that has the exact name within RxNorm or RxNorm extension, it will tell you to go review the mappings because potentially a match exists. So you would fill these 4 tables, and then the SQL code on GitHub, once executed, will run the whole pipeline. And the challenges is kind of important to, even though we have 1 minute, I wanted to talk about main challenges briefly, because I think this is an opportunity for us to actually work together, because I think we've dealt with some of these problems, but really they're not solved. The first problem, broadly speaking, is messy sources, where you don't have a clear understanding of what the dose form is. Sometimes the drugs are represented as ions, sometimes as salts, maybe the strength is off, volume is weird. So there is quite a lot to clean up in the sources, and I feel that we as a community should do a better job with coming up with informatics solutions for that. Then there are also conceptual questions. For example, device versus drug. We do have definition for devices on the Odyssey GitHub, but I feel that there is more that can be done in terms of automating this, the algorithm that would actually distinguish devices from drugs, because right now, you know the categories and you pretty much fish for devices, as opposed to having some sort of informatics solutions. And the same goes with brand names versus suppliers. It's not always fully clear where something is a brand name versus supplier. And then the final question, I think the biggest, is what is the minimal viable product, because in this process of creating drug terms and maintaining our RxNorm extension, a lot of the effort and time is actually spent on the very granular terms like branded drugs, quantified branded products. The more down it goes, the harder it gets. But I'm getting a sense that actually clinical drugs can be just enough. So I was hoping to get the reflections of this community in terms of what is the actual minimal viable product we need? Is clinical drug enough? That would reduce the time that it takes to process vocabularies to a much smaller effort. So maybe there is an opportunity for us to brainstorm in terms of what would be the minimal viable product. And with that, I think I'm over time, so I'm going to stop. No time for questions, but if you have questions, shoot me an email or a Teams message.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anna, and sorry about the my bad timekeeping there. I think it's really important for us as a community to join in on this effort, because I think we can, it'll help us all if we get this up and running. So I'm just throwing something up there. Is it something we can do at the Odyssey Europe community, or the symposium in the weekend, for example, to have a session dedicated to this with a bunch of people working on it, and just see what we can give our input or do something? Would you be open for that, or do we need to throw in another meeting? How can we help you?
Oh, sky's the limit. We should, I think we would love to explore a possibility of a dedicated effort in 2026. And it would be nice for us to discuss what is the format and how we can best move together.
Okay, well, that's your call to action, and thanks so much. For anybody who has now been triggered and who would like to join this initiative, reach out to Anna, to me, to Adima's on the call as well. If you want to join or you have ideas about this, then please reach out and see how we can all work on this together. Thank you all so much. I'm going to not even share my screen anymore because we are over time. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us this year during the calls, and we look forward to seeing you next year. I hope you have a really, really good Christmas break. And don't forget to think about your abstracts for the Odyssey Europe Symposium, because the deadline is February 6th, something to do during your Christmas vacation. And see you guys all in the new year. Thank you.